We're going to finish up the material this week talking about roots. First of all, we should look at the kinds of root systems. One kind of root system is called a taproot system. The taproot is a single root that grows deep into the soil with very low levels of branching. And this is very common in broadleaf trees. One axiom they tell you is there's usually a single root that's called a taproot. And one axiom they tell you is that if you look at a tree, however tall the tree is, the primary taproot underground is of equal length. So if you have a 20-foot tree, then you'll have a 20-foot taproot going down into the ground. And the primary roots grow directly from the plant embryo, the rhizome and the plant embryo. Now, fleshy roots are just large taproots that have a lot of stored food, such as carrots, beets, and dandelions. Remember, potatoes are not roots. The second kind of root system is called a fibrous root system. A fibrous root system has no main section, but spreads out with very thin roots. Grass is several different kinds of grass are a good example of a fibrous root system. Adventitious roots are roots that develop from any part of the plant other than the root tissue. So, for example, if you plant a stem and that stem eventually forms a root, then that is called an adventitious root. So what is the root structure? The outer part of the root is a single layer of cells called the epidermis, and this protects the root and also prevents water loss from the root. From the epidermis come small finger-like projections called root hairs, and the purpose of the root hairs is to increase the surface area for water absorption. Inside the root, inside the epidermis, is the root cortex. The root cortex is where the food is stored for the root. And then inside the cortex is called the central vascular cylinder. The central vascular cylinder contains the xylem tissue that carries water from the ground to the stem. This area is also called the stele. How do roots grow? The principal way a root grows is called apical meristem growth. This is the group of cells on the apex of the root going down, and it's the main growing region. It's at the tip of the root, at the bottom of the root, if you're looking at it from top to bottom, and it is responsible for the growth of the root deeper into the ground. The root increases in length as the apical meristem forms epidermis, cortex, and vascular tissue going down. The meristematic region of the root is the closest to the end, and it is where the cell division actually occurs. The intermediate region of the root is called the region of elongation, and there the cells increase in length. And then lastly, the top part of the root, closer to the stem, is called the maturation region, and this is where the cells organize into the vascular cylinder. So the root cap, which is several layers of tough cells on the end, is pushed into the ground by growth and division in the apical meristem. The growth layer of cells between the xylem and phloem, which allows for the diameter to increase, is called the vascular cambium. And this increase in diameter is called secondary growth. So the primary growth is north and south into the ground. The secondary growth is the increase in diameter. And as it increases in diameter, cork cambium is formed, and the cork cambium acts as a protective layer underneath the epidermis. Now, lateral roots are secondary roots that form from the vascular cylinder and have the same structure as the primary root. So here's a diagram. Let's go over all these various areas. So the root cap is here, and the apical meristem is down here. Okay. The meristematic region is the region of cell division that pushes this down into the ground. Then the region of elongation, which is where the cells elongate and the root becomes longer. And then the maturation region up here where the actual vascular cylinder is formed. This shows the root hairs, and then the vascular cylinder or stele is here in the middle. And central to that vascular cylinder is the xylem, and then more lateral here and here is the phloem. Between the epidermis, which is here, and the vascular cylinder here is the cortex. And so this diagram shows the general makeup of the root. So how is material absorbed and transported in the root and up the stem? First of all, you need to understand certain definitions. And one definition is permeable. Permeable means that certain substances are allowed to pass through, in this case, the root. And substances will pass through randomly if they're allowed to pass through. And this diffusion, and I think we've talked about diffusion before, diffusion is the random movement and mixing that happens according to concentration differences. So if you have for example, if you have a higher concentration of solutes, like sugar or minerals here, then the water out here will passively move through the permeable layers to get in here. And that's called diffusion. Now, osmosis, on the other hand, is when this layer is only semi-permeable. And semi-permeable means it allows certain substances to move through, but other substances do not move through. And when you have a semi-permeable membrane with only certain substances moving through, they still move by concentration. So the root will form something called a sap stream. The sap stream is the upward flow of water and minerals in the xylem. The osmotic pressure that forces the water into the xylem and then up the root is called the root pressure. And this root pressure is generally generated by capillary movement. And capillary movement, and I didn't type this out very well, but it's the upward liquid movement that's caused when you put liquid in a very small or narrow tube. And if you take a narrow tube and dip it in water, you'll see that the water will climb into the tube a certain amount above the surface of the water. And this is caused by a couple of things. One is called adhesion, which is the attraction of liquid molecules to the sides of the tube, as well as cohesion, which is the attraction of liquid molecules to each other. And so these two attractions cause the water to move up into the tube without any outward force. And then the last force or factor that leads to the upward movement of water is called the transpiration pull. You remember that transpiration is the exchange of water through the leaves that happens when the stoma are open. And this is a force that comes from the leaves as the water departs, and it pulls the water up from the stem and roots into the leaves.